So as Tyler told you, Phil has a touch of laryngitis. So he has written the sermon today and has asked me to deliver it. But I have to tell you, I'm feeling a little nervous. So I am taking my Wonder Woman stance right now. If any of you have seen the TED Talk, this is supposed to lower your cortisol so that I do not speed read for you guys. So here we go. Oh, and anything that you disagree with, again, these are Phil's comments, not mine. Well, it's December, which means we are moving into the heart of the holiday season. The holiday season is, of course, filled with holiday traditions, and one of the most widely observed and fastest holiday growing traditions in this country is a relatively recent invention. Not Elf on the Shelf. I'm referring to the annual propagandization of the idea that there is, in this country, a war on Christmas. Now, it's only a small subset of Christmas observers who actually believe in and celebrate the war on Christmas every year. But they are loud, zealously defending the institution of Christmas against the danger of imminent extinction. The Christmas warriors use and militantly enforce the use of the phrase, "Merry Christmas," at every opportunity in their eternal struggle against the patently un-American expression, "Happy Holidays." I kind of miss the old days when the phrase "Merry Christmas," even when it was used thoughtlessly, communicated nothing more than the earnest holiday cheer. Today, when a random individual says to me, "Merry Christmas," I can no longer be sure whether the words are genuine gestures of goodwill or a coded dog whistle suggesting that Jews, Muslims, and other religious minorities had better stay in their place. The growing belief that there is a war on Christmas is itself a symptom of the political polarization that we have recently seen in this country. And although the war on Christmas is not real, the belief that it exists signifies that there is a very real cultural war that is being waged in our country right now. It has become increasingly clear that we are in the midst of a cultural revolution that this nation has not seen since the 1950s or 60s. From the rise of Black Lives Matter to the growing recognition of LGBTQ rights to the still unfolding #MeToo revolution, traditionally marginalized Americans are rising up to say that they will no longer be silent. And predictably, we are seeing a backlash among those who want these people to go back to being quiet and servile. Painted in broad strokes, the heart of this conflict is not simply right versus left or Democrat versus Republican. It is pluralism versus assimilationism. All healthy and cohesive communities, religious or secular, are built around shared values. Those shared values are what give communities their identity. They help delineate the outer membrane of the group to help sort out who and what is a part of the community and who and what is outside of that community. As a country, right now, we are trying to figure out which value is more important to us, diversity or homogeneity. And the answer to that question will ultimately determine whether we will embrace pluralism or assimilationism. In a nutshell, pluralism seeks a harmonious balance of peoples and cultures, all living together, genuinely celebrating diversity, and being intentionally inclusive of differences. Such pluralism is very difficult to achieve. It comes always with high risk of conflict. Misunderstandings are common. Complex harmonies slip easily into dissonance. There are so many rules of the road to learn, and that's because there's not just one road anymore. Basic cultural literacy of multiple cultures requires multiplying the time and energy we each invest in learning about others. Pluralism at its best is messy and slow and inefficient. Assimilationism, on the other hand, is much faster, much easier. It's orderly, more peaceful. It comes with far less risk of conflict or misunderstanding, and that's because instead of many voices, there is only one. instead of complex harmonies, everyone is singing the same note. There is one authoritative culture, one set of values and practices, one perspective. Outsiders to assimilationist communities may be allowed to enter, but at the price of conversion. And those already within who refuse to assimilate must be cast into outer darkness or in some other way eliminated. I, for one, choose pluralism. That is the America I want to live in. That is the America I believe we were promised by the founders, even if they didn't believe in it to the full expression of it themselves. During the March on Washington, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said the following: "We've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all would be guaranteed unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned." Having read much of Dr. King's subsequent work, I think it's safe to say, and keeping very much in the spirit of his evolving prophetic ministry, that Dr. King's observations apply with equal force to every marginalized and oppressed group within this country, not just people of color. It is, of course, incredibly easy to sit back in our chairs or to stand behind pulpits and condemn the vice of assimilationism and laud the virtue of pluralism. But before we too harshly critique others, we ought first to reflect on ourselves and our own shortcomings. Unitarian Universalism purports to embrace pluralism. That is why we have no creed. That is why our faith draws inspiration from several religious sources. And yet, the distance between who we claim we want to be and who we actually are is just as great, if not greater, than the distance separating the aspirations and the actuality of our nation. As a faith tradition, we have not yet figured out how to reconcile our aspirations to our practices, our theology to our praxis. And so our vociferous vituperations against assimilation will always ring a bit hollow, at least until we can actually show the world a working, flourishing model of pluralism. We've got to get this right in our own house before anyone else is going to listen to us. Now, I don't claim to have all of the answers about how to become a genuinely pluralistic community, but I do have a few ideas from a powerful experience I had earlier this summer. This summer, Sunny and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary by vacationing in Europe. Our travels took us to Taizé, France. Excuse me. I had dreamed of visiting the Taizé community ever since I first learned about it 20 years ago. For those who don't know about Taizé, it's an ecumenical Christian community that was founded in 1940. Since that time, it has become a popular pilgrimage site, especially for young people. Every year, over 100,000 people from all across the world come to visit and share a modern monastic experience. It is a week-long experience of praying, singing, chanting, studying, meditating, reflecting, and working together in a spirit of simplicity and community. At any given time at Taizé, you may find pilgrims from over 100 different countries speaking over 80 different languages, representing a myriad of different Christian denominations and churches, and also some faiths outside of Christianity. Although the average length of stay for a pilgrim is only about 1 week, it is one of the most breathtaking examples of pluralism in action that I have ever witnessed. And I was sure to take plenty of mental notes while I was there to bring back to us. This morning, I'd like to share 3 lessons that I learned about pluralism from Taizé. First, pluralism requires an intentional and strategic decentering of the inherited dominant culture. If you want to become more multicultural and less monocultural, then you must create a space where those representing different cultures feel welcomed and important. Making the circle bigger means that defenders and beneficiaries of the dominant and inherited culture must voluntarily choose to share their space, their stage, and most importantly, their power and resources. Refusing to make changes by saying, "But that's how we've always done it," is the recipe for assimilationism. Taizé is in France. It would have been easy for the early founders of that community to simply do all of their prayers, Bible readings, and songs in French. Accommodating different languages is costly and difficult. But early on, the Brotherhood there chose to decenter, not entirely eliminate, simply decenter the Frenchness or frankness of their community. In a typical Taizé worship service, there are prayers, readings, and songs in French, English, Russian, German, Latin, Spanish, and Japanese, among other languages. For the songs, there are translations, nearly a dozen different languages printed at the bottom of the hymnal. But the order of the languages in the translations is constantly shifting. For example, the French song on page 1 may have English as the first listed translation and Russian as the last. The German song on page 2 may have Italian as the first translation and English as the last. And the Russian song on page 3 may have Spanish as the first translation and French as the last. It's inefficient and somewhat confusing, but it shows that the community of Taizé understands the subtle power of primacy and how even the rank order of things quietly communicates what or whom is truly valued. Equity isn't always efficient, but it's a requisite of inclusivity and a precursor to diversity. If you want pluralism, one culture cannot dominate others, even if it is the oldest and most well-represented culture within that community. The second lesson, one of the most important but least heralded virtues for the establishing of pluralism is patience. During morning Bible study at Taizé, one of the brothers of the monastic order leads the study, and he does so speaking one language. In our case, our brother spoke English. The pilgrims who did not understand English organically clustered or caucused in their own language group and chose from among themselves an interpreter. The brother would say a couple of sentences and then pause. Then a dozen or so interpreters would stand up and turn to their language group and interpret what was said. It was amazing to watch. It was also very long. A 20-minute study lasted for about an hour. But it was beautiful. I was especially moved by listening to the echoes of laughter that always came after the brother told a joke. We English speakers laughed immediately and then waited with anticipation to hear the laughter spring up in each of the other language groups as each interpreter retold the joke. Patience requires a healthy level of selflessness because to operate well in a pluralistic community, we have to understand that it's not always about me. We can't always have our individual desires and expectations fulfilled at every moment. That's because different people have different desires and expectations, and they can't all be met at the same time. Pluralistic communities require us to patiently wait our turn to be fed. And in the meantime, while we're waiting our turn, it makes little sense to complain or begrudge an element of worship, knowing that it is feeding our fellow brother, sister, or sibling. During worship at Taizé, a brother would offer a reading in a given language. Let's say one reading was initially in German. Then another brother would offer the same reading in a different language, perhaps French. Sometimes there was a third translation of the same reading, maybe Portuguese. Now, I myself am regrettably a fairly monolingual American. I don't know French, German, or Portuguese. So guess what? The reading wasn't for me. It may have fed 75% of the other worshipers surrounding me, but not me. I had to be okay with that. But actually, it was an amazing opportunity for me to practice my faith and enlarge my spirit. Because in that moment, when I was personally getting nothing out of the service, I had the opportunity to bask in the realization that these wonderful people all around me were being touched. I could look around and see the rest of my impromptu community was getting something from this reading. It was feeding their soul. Thus, I vicariously and empathetically felt joy for their joy at being fed and nourished. How often do we get that in a worship context? When we're busy eating, we often don't take time to notice and appreciate how much of our friends are enjoying their meal. As a minister, I can tell you that sometimes the most gratifying thing during worship service is to see someone else being blessed when you're not busy worrying about receiving your own blessing. Pluralistic religious communities like Taizé are a spiritual buffet. You have to take what you want and leave what you don't. And when it comes to making changes to a buffet, it's always easier to add than subtract. Just because I don't like green beans, that doesn't mean that I should demand that the restaurant remove green beans from the buffet table. I know there are people in my community who love those nasty little things. Removing the green beans will not further nourish me. It will only take nourishment away from someone at my dinner table. Pluralism is about making both the dinner and the buffet table bigger, not smaller. Third and final lesson. In a pluralistic community, there is a healthy balance and an understanding of roles between the young and the old. Taizé is primarily a community of young people, teenagers and young adults. Sunny and I were among a small but significant minority of adults. The lifeblood of that community is young people. And it all works because the young have great respect for the elders, and the elders have the same respect for the young. The young in general honor the patterns and expectations established by the elders. They defer to the adults by giving them the best and most accessible seats in worship, and the young perform most of the work during the week, including all of the cooking and cleaning. The elders, in turn, love and support the young. Part of the reason why the elders are comfortable with this arrangement is because so many of the older adults at Taizé were themselves once young people at Taizé. During our time there, Sunny and I were essentially adopted by a kindly older French couple who had been coming to Taizé every year for decades. It was that love that allowed them to enjoy their new roles in this community, the roles of honored guide, supporter, and mentor. The adults at Taizé recognize that the youth are the vanguards and harbingers of change, and to remain relevant to the greater community and to the world, they had to not only listen to the young, but let them do the lion's share of the work and decision-making. To give them the freedom to succeed and fail, the freedom to make good decisions and bad decisions, the same freedom that they themselves were afforded when they were in their place. I believe that these three lessons about pluralism from Taizé can generalize. If we want pluralism to flourish, we must intentionally decenter the inherited practices, values, and power of the dominant culture in order to make space for others. We must be patient with one another and take genuine pleasure in the feeding and edification of others in our community, even when we ourselves are not being fed and edified at the moment. And we must find a healthy balance between and among the generations, a clarity of roles and expectations so that young and old alike may honor and support one another for the greater good and for the future of the entire community. If we truly desire diversity, if we believe we are better and stronger together, if we want to live in a beloved community where differences are celebrated, then I encourage us to find ways to put these three lessons into practice this holiday season and beyond. Amen. Blessed be, and happy holidays.